Hi, it's Matt here. So what if death just stopped? No more funerals, no more ticking clock, no more you only live once. Sounds like total paradise, right? Nah, it's really not. Today, I'm gonna show you why curing death could quietly mess everything up. Let's jump in. Every human system, our markets, our politics, and our family structures operates on the assumption of a strict, unyielding deadline. The engine of civilizational progress has always been generational turnover, but we are approaching a threshold where that sand stops falling. For centuries, the biological consensus treated universal senescence as a thermodynamic necessity. Entropy dictates that complex systems must eventually accumulate errors and decay. Death was accepted as an inescapable law of physics. That historical assumption is shifting. Regenerative medicine and molecular biology now frame aging as a collection of cumulative metabolic disruptions. It is a technical problem, and a technical problem can be engineered into a state of potential immortality or true immortality. Curing death dismantles the structural constraints of human economics, of our psychology, and of our evolutionary biology. At the macro level, removing the mechanism of death freezes social mobility. It locks capital and political influence into an unbroken loop of concentration inside the human mind. It erases the evolutionary drives that push us to build legacies, reproduce, and value our time. And at the microscopic level, achieving this requires precise interventions into the computational logic of our cells or the digital emulation of our neural networks. The victory over biological failure forces a confrontation with a much older problem. A socioeconomic engine designed to run on a resource turnover that is about to disappear. To see how an immortal society breaks down, we start at the structural level with the concept of gerontocracy, the end of turnover in any political or corporate hierarchy. Influence naturally accumulates with age without forced generational turnover. The oldest individuals consolidate and retain control. We see this early in human history with the Spartan Gerousia, an elite council restricted to men over the age of 60 monopolizing state decisions. We saw it again in the late 20th century with the Soviet Union, where an aging leadership locked out younger generations, leading to institutional sclerosis. An immortal state scales the sclerosis indefinitely if top-tier positions are permanently occupied by individuals with centuries of experience. Younger citizens enter a state of social suspension, highly educated but permanently blocked from advancement. This bottleneck extends directly from political power into the concentration of private capital, driven by the mechanics of intergenerational wealth transfer. This chart visualizes data from the Federal Reserve Survey of Consumer Finances. It shows that direct inheritances and gifts are heavily skewed toward recipients who are already in the highest income and wealth deciles. Generational transfer is the primary driver of extreme wealth concentration. If the super rich never die, dynastic wealth will never disperse. Capital simply compounds indefinitely within a closed loop of the elite. Some economists point to the secular stagnation theory, assuming that an aging immortal population would destroy economic growth due to lower labor participation and excess savings. This data from MIT economist Daron Acemoglu contradicts that assumption. It shows that countries experiencing rapid demographic aging actually adopt automation technologies at a much faster rate, maintaining high productivity despite an older workforce, and mortality does not destroy the economy through stagnation. It hyper-concentrates high productivity, driven by automation combined with zero estate dispersion, triggers a death spiral effect of permanent, unbreakable inequality. If a macroeconomic structure stalls without death, the internal architecture of the human mind faces an equally severe collapse. Biologists and psychologists use a framework called adaptive time management. This maps how our subjective perception of time and the choices we make are regulated entirely by our awareness of mortality. This timeline visualizes a constricted life horizon when individuals perceive their remaining time as scarce. They adopt fast life history strategies. They prioritize immediate survival, rapid reproduction, and near-term rewards. An extended horizon facilitates slow strategies with the pressure of a deadline removed. Organisms focus on long-term planning, heavy investment in fewer offspring, and evolutionary bet hedging. In humans, this temporal pressure creates a unique conflict articulated by evolutionary biologist Lonnie Arsen as the transmission competition hypothesis. The first half of this competition is gene transmission, the primal biologic drive to reproduce and pass genetic material to offspring. The second half is meme transmission. This is the drive to leave a lasting cultural legacy through personal achievements, art, scientific discoveries, or amassed wealth. Arsen argues that this legacy drive evolved specifically as a psychological buffer. Knowing we are not immortal generates profound, existential anguish. We soothe that anxiety by believing our achievements will grant us a symbolic permanence. Indefinite existence eliminates the biological threat, which simultaneously eliminates the psychological need. If death is cured, the belief in legacy is no longer required to manage anxiety. Without the harsh constraint of an inevitable deadline, the urgency to sacrifice, build, or safeguard the future dissipates. The narrative arc that gives human life its meaning is dissolved by infinite time. To understand exactly how close we are to realizing this societal shift, we have to look at the strict mechanical constraints of human biology. Aging is not a single mystical force. It is a series of specific metabolic disruptions, a collection of cellular pathologies that can be individually targeted and repaired. The primary barrier to indefinite cellular division is known as the Hayflick limit. At the ends of our chromosomes are protective caps called telomeres. With every cell division, these telomeres visibly shorten. Once they are exhausted, the cell can no longer divide and enters a state of senescence. The cellular rejuvenation hypothesis bypasses this limit using an enzyme called telomerase. Telomerase rebuilds the shortened telomeres, allowing the cell to divide indefinitely without damage. We already observe this biological immortality in nature. Cancer lineages like the famous HeLa cell line shown here effectively utilize telomerase to replicate without end. The alternative pathway abandons biology in favor of substrate-independent minds. This relies on the premise that human personality is essentially software. By scanning a biological neural network with high enough resolution, its precise structural connectivity can be mapped and executed on a silicon substrate. But this digital emulation runs into a hard philosophical limit known as the philosophical zombie problem. If a computer processes sensory inputs and generates behavioral outputs identical to a human, it creates a perfect replica. However, there is no way to verify if that replica actually possesses internal subjective consciousness, the inner experience of qualia. You may not survive the upload. You may simply leave behind a very convincing copy. Whether we synthesize telomerase to repair our biology or upload our maps to silicon, overcoming the physical mechanism of death is merely an engineering hurdle. We are steadily mapping the mechanisms required to halt biological decay. Aging is being relocated from an inevitable fate to a manageable pathology. But escaping that deadline risks extinguishing the evolutionary legacy drive that compels us to innovate, build, and invest in the future. And on a macroeconomic scale, indefinite life guarantees the permanent suspension of social mobility, locking capital and influence into dynastic monopolies. Humanity has built its world on the fuel of generational turnover. Every system of law, wealth, and power assumes that the individuals currently holding them will eventually leave the stage. Transitioning to an era of active longevity requires us to manually re-engineer our political and financial systems to enforce the wealth distribution and power rotation that biology used to provide for us automatically. The ultimate challenge of indefinite existence is not curing death. It is designing a civilization capable of maintaining progress, purpose, and equity in a world where the ultimate deadline has been erased.